Dear students, good morning. Today we are going to discuss about the actors of international relations. This PowerPoint is going to give you a brief understanding of who are the actors of international relations and how are they classified. Today we're going to go through the main feature of actors of international relations again. We will list the main types of actors, as well as we're going to try and evaluate the state and non-state actors of IR. You can find more information in Joshua Goldstein International Relations, available in soft copy on MS Teams, page 12 to 17. So, as I mentioned before, international community, there are many players or actors engaged in what is viewed the international relations system. And actors of international relations can be defined as an entity or entities that answer three major features. First and foremost, they have an overall capacity to decide their purpose and interest. They have the capability to mobilize the required resources or to achieve their interest and are passionate about global cooperation. Their actions should be significant and enough to influence the state-to-state relations or behavior of other non-states. Furthermore, we can differentiate among the following types of actors in international relations. State actors are the states or nation states. Non-state actors are intergovernmental organizations, multinational, transnational corporations, political groups that advocate violence or terrorist organizations, and non-governmental international organizations and sub-state actors. So we are going to go through them one by one. If we're talking about a state, first and foremost, the states are the major actors of IR, and despite the fact that we have non-state actors that are that have a high influence over the international relations, states are still have the last resort in terms of decision-making process. So a state is a type of polity, organization, or institution that is an organized political community living under a single system of government, a political community that represents a government responsible for citizens of a state. Or else we can define a state as a territorial entity controlled by a government and inhabited by a population. A state government answers to no higher authority, exercises sovereignty over its territory to make and enforce laws, to collect taxes, and so on. The sovereignty of states is recognized by other states through diplomatic relations and the membership in the UN. Nation-states can be defined as autonomous geopolitical entities inhabited by citizens sharing the same language, history, and ethnicity. So basically, not all the states can be considered nation-states, right? If we're talking about characteristics of nation-states, first and foremost, they have a geographically defined territory. They are sovereign entities, they have a government, they have boundaries, they have strict boundaries. They will most likely have some, let's say, nationalistic ideas, or they have created, they have been created along with a certain nation, and they do require and have the obedience and loyalty of population that inhabits that territory. Furthermore, states have the following characteristics. So, with few exceptions, each state has a capital city. So there are certain states that do not have a capital city. Often a single individual who is actually ruling the country is called head of government, prime minister or a state, president, king or queen. One of the most important characteristics of a state is the ability to maintain sovereignty, which means that the state has the full right and power of a governing body itself without any interference from outside sources or bodies. If we're talking about the role of nation states in international relations, first and foremost, they have the capacity of decision making, they have a political, economical, and social impact, and they do have their own, most of them, they have their own culture. So we can differentiate the states according to different characteristics, right? So if we're talking about political system, we might have democracies, monarchies, autocracies. If we're talking about difference of population, then we can have states that have a huge number of population, like for example, China and India have over 1 billion people. And we have states that we could have states that have a very reduced population, like for example, San Marino. We also might differentiate the states according to their size of total annual economic activity, according to their gross domestic product, for example. So, U.S. economy might would produce, let's say, around $15 trillion, whereby such tiny states, a specific island or of Tuvalu, would produce around 36 million. So you can see that there is a huge discrepancy. We also can differentiate the states according to their military strength and influence. So most of the states that have high capacity to high military and strength capacity are also called superpowers, as they are capable to show global influence. So if we're talking about Cold War, US and USSR were recognized as superpowers after 1990. We can say that after 1990, it's only US that has the superpower. However, in the latest years, we can see that China is also actively investing in military, in increasing of their military capability. We can also identify formal colonies and possessions. So, for example, Puerto Rico formally is a state. However, it does somehow depend on U.S. politically. Bermuda is British. Falkland Islands are British, right? And then we have non-member observer states in the UN, which are Vatican and Palestine. Since 2012, they do have their own territory and they do have their own political structure. However, they do not have they do not have the right to vote in the UN. States can also, we can also differentiate the states according to their economic development. So we could say that we have developed, developing, and underdeveloped states. And if we're talking about developed states, they have a lot of means of production. They do focus on technological sector or tertiary sector. The population is most likely aging. Policies would actually be directed to balance inequalities, and it's based on subsidies. And we might notice one of the main characteristics that the states are actually quite, or these countries have a high number of urban population. If we're talking about developing countries, they have a low per capita real income, whereby in developed countries the income is high per capita. They have a high population growth rate. They have high rates of unemployment. They do depend on primary sector, and they do depend on exports of primary commodities. If we're talking about underdeveloped countries, then in this case we have more population than resources, and most of the population cannot have access to them. They are focused on the primary sector, whereby the developing countries will most likely focus on secondary sector, and they have giant cities, developed areas, and undeveloped. Like they might have cities that have a high level of development, and on the other hand, they have countrysides where they don't even have electricity. They have a commercial dependence on the developed and developing countries. So if we're talking about differentiation by population, we can say that we can say that there are some states that have huge population, or let's say largest population, right? Or they have a huge economic development, right? Some of the states have both characteristics. So, for example, Pakistan has large population, but their economic development is quite low, whereby Britain has large economy, but they have an aging population, and they do depend on the manpower that comes from outside. On the other hand, we have countries that have both characteristics. So, for example, China has both a large population, and they do have a significant economic impact in the world. Okay, so we spoke about the state as the main state actor. Now we are going to speak about the non-state actors. And as I mentioned at the beginning of our lesson, we can differentiate among the non-state actors. We can differentiate the transnational corporations, multinational corporations, groups promoting violence, intergovernmental organizations, and sub-state actors. So it is quite difficult to define non-state actors. Normally, we might misunderstand, or say normally people do misunderstand the meaning behind the non-state actors. Therefore, for example, for many people who live within borders of multi-religious and multi-ethnic states, their primary identity is defined by the mixture of their religion and ethnicity, and not only by the territory where they live, right? So non-state actors are organizations with sufficient power to influence and cause a change, even though they do not belong to any established state. So if we're talking about the first type of non-state actors, these are intergovernmental organizations. And as a definition, intergovernmental organizations are those organizations whose members are national governments, and they do reply to the following features. They fulfill the variety of functions of economic, political, and humanitarian. So they do have huge impact in the international system. They can vary in size from few states to whole UN membership. Intergovernmental organizations are established by states, most times through a treaty. So the states are the ones that regulate let's say, the actions taken by the intergovernmental organizations. They do operate by consent of a state. So states maintain their sovereignty, right? So even though states are part of these intergovernmental organizations, the other states, or say the other states are not able to interfere in the internal affairs of a state. And according to the liberal institutionalism, which we are going to take a little bit later, states join IGOs because it is in favor of their interest. Or let's say the intergovernmental organizations do follow the principle of reciprocity in terms of finding solution to to the collective goods problem. So examples might be United Nations or some other IGOs or agencies of United Nations, such as Food and Agriculture Organization, International Labor Organization, International Maritime Organizations, and so on. Non-governmental organizations are also called NGOs. They are defined as non-profit organizations who advocate or otherwise pursue policies for the good of the public. Non-governmental organizations are engaged in issues like human rights, humanitarian aid, development, economic development, social welfare, and many other things. Some of the well-known NGOs include Red Crescent, Greenpeace, Oxfam, Amnesty International, and so on. Transnational actors are actors that are active below the state level as well as across the state borders. So there are two types of transnational actors. First and foremost, we have transnational corporations, and they are any enterprise that undertakes foreign direct investment, owns or controls income-gathering assets in more than one country, produces goods, services outside its country of origin, or engages in international production. So examples of this are Facebook, Google, Coca-Cola. Multinational corporations, they are companies whose aims is to make profit, and their business interests transcend across more than one state. Most times these multinational enterprises do command a vast amount of resources that rival and even surpass the resources of a smaller state. For example, Dangote Group, Epson, Facebook, ExxonMobil, and so on. So if we're talking about the terrorist groups or political groups that advocate violence, they will not call themselves, most likely they will not call themselves groups that advocate violence, or they will not call themselves NGOs. However, they do act under the same manner, which are by interacting with both states and with relevant populations and institutions through violence and planning attacks. So these groups held a great power and can influence the international relations between the states. Examples of groups that advocate violence nowadays that are most active are Boko Haram, Al-Qaeda, and so on.